For millions of Americans, a specific market sequence is currently set to vaporize 30 years of savings in just 18 months. This isn't a theory, it is a mathematical certainty for those who fail to see the trap before the landing gear is down. Most people treat their 50s like a gentle runway to retirement. In reality, this is the final, unforgiving gate. It is the last decade where the math still allows for a course correction. After 60, the tools available to you shrink and the margin for error disappears. Historical wealth loss for the middle class rarely happens through a single catastrophic mistake. It happens through a slow drift of inaction. Middle-class families watching the math change while they wait for a feeling of safety that never comes. This data reveals a stark demographic reality. 61% of American workers currently in their 50s have less than $100,000 saved for retirement. The crisis destroying this generation's future is not a lack of information. It is a biological trick, a false sense of security that makes people sleepwalk through their most critical decade because they have something to show for their labor. This false safety illusion is a hardware error in the human brain. Your brain uses dopamine to reward you for 30 years of work, creating a feeling of relief. But dopamine does not know the difference between having $50,000 and having $500,000. To break the illusion, you have to perform a math audit. You must stop looking at your total balance and start looking at the sustainable monthly yield that balance provides. Taking a $100,000 portfolio at a 7% return produces $7,000 a year. That's $583 a month. If expenses are $3,000, that $100,000 nest egg is exhausted in under 3 years. Feeling on track in your 50s is often just a symptom of the safety illusion. Real financial security is found in the numbers, not the relief you feel when checking your account balance. The first enemy preventing people from closing this gap is lifestyle cement. By your 50s, your expenses have hardened from simple monthly choices into the load-bearing walls of your social identity, the car, the neighborhood, and the status signals that tell the world you've arrived. Harvard researchers studying financial behavior found a startling trend. People over 50 are 3 times more likely to maintain spending that causes extreme financial stress than they are to cut costs tied to their social status. Your brain is hardwired to fear social discomfort more than financial ruin. You might keep a $650 car payment, not because the car is necessary, but because your internal voice says cutting back would mean you failed to make it. The math of that decision is brutal. If you redirected just $800 of monthly vanity spending into a 7% return, it would build over $138,000 in new wealth over the next 10 years. Most people choose permanent financial damage over a temporary change in lifestyle because they cannot tell the difference between a necessary expense and one that has merely become load-bearing to their ego. Even if you break the cement, you still face the sequence destroyer. This threat is entirely about timing, specifically when the stock market decides to crash relative to your first day of retirement. If the market drops 30% in your first 2 years of retirement, you are forced to sell your remaining assets at the bottom just to pay your bills. This shreds your portfolio's base before it has any chance to recover. Data from Boston College shows that a 25% drop in those first 3 years permanently reduces your lifetime retirement income by 37%. You don't just lose money, you lose years of survival. Average market returns won't save you if the sequence is against you early on. This second line shows the same starting amount and the same crash, but because the drop happened later in the timeline, the portfolio survives decades longer. The sequence destroyer vaporizes the spending power of an entire generation, creating a permanent economic contraction for those who enter retirement without a cash buffer. The final threat in the 50s trap is the identity cliff. Most people assume retirement will feel like freedom, but for many, it feels like an erasure of the self. Research from the Institute of Economic Affairs shows that the transition into retirement increases the probability of clinical depression by 40% as the structural purpose of a career vanishes. This demographic chart shows the physical toll as well. At the exact moment income stops, the probability of a diagnosed physical illness spikes by 60%. This psychological collapse accelerates medical costs that no retirement model can sustain. Without a plan for what your brain will build after the paycheck stops, you are essentially calculating a path to medical bankruptcy. A financial plan is only half the battle. Without a purpose plan to navigate the identity cliff, your savings will be consumed by the physical costs of a life without construction work. To survive your 50s, you must begin a 3-stage reset tonight. Stage 1. See the real number. Calculate the exact gap between your current 7% yield and your actual living expenses. Replace the illusion with math. Stage 2. Close the gap aggressively. Test every major expense against the load-bearing wall test and redirect that capital into a 2-year cash mode. This ensures you never have to sell investments during a sequence destroyer event. Stage 3. Build the structure. Identify 2 non-leisure projects you are building that will survive your retirement. Your brain needs problems to solve and timelines to meet, or it will start dismantling you from the inside out. The lifestyle cement will tell you to wait until things settle down to start this reset. But every year you delay costs you tens of thousands of dollars in compounding leverage. The right time will never feel right. If you want to understand the hidden power behind money and the global economy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel Dollar Logic USA. Most people spend their 50s waiting for retirement, but the modern economic system is quietly setting up millions of comfortable middle-class Americans to fail in their final working decade. They think they are on a runway, when in reality, they are walking right off a cliff. In the Great Depression, comfortable families rarely lost everything in one sudden crash. The devastation usually happened through a slow drift of inaction. They kept waiting for a feeling of certainty instead of reading the math, and the right moment to act never came. Today, that exact pattern is repeating. Research shows that 61% of American workers currently in their 50s have less than $100,000 saved for retirement. This chart shows exactly what that means in practice. If you take that $100,000 balance and project a standard 7% annual return, it generates about $7,000 a year. That works out to $583 a month. If your typical living expenses are $3,000 a month, your entire capital base evaporates in under 2 months. Your 50s represent a high-stakes final exam, not a time to coast. Waiting for a supposedly easier time to save is the most expensive mistake you can make. The reason so many smart people fall into this trap comes down to a biological glitch called the false safety illusion. Human brains are terrible at distinguishing between having some savings and having enough savings. After 30 years accumulating a house, contributing to a pension, and building a modest portfolio, your brain rewards you with a hit of dopamine. It feels like progress. But dopamine doesn't know the difference between $50,000 and $500,000. It only knows you have something. Confusing that temporary feeling of safety with the cold mathematics of actual retirement yields will create a massive blind spot. You sleepwalk through your most important earning years because you feel fine, right up until the math proves otherwise. That blind spot gets reinforced by a second structural vulnerability: lifestyle cement. By your 50s, your expenses have hardened into a rigid social identity. The cars, the private schools, and the neighborhood act as load-bearing walls for your entire psychological life. The consumer economy exploits this exact dynamic. Every dollar you spend carries a social contract. If you try to cut a premium gym membership or trade down a vehicle, your brain doesn't calculate the savings. It calculates the social damage of what your friends will think. Given the choice, your brain will choose financial damage over social discomfort. Here is a chart showing the mathematical cost of maintaining that social comfort. If you reduce your monthly burn rate by $800, cutting spending that no longer serves your actual life, and keep that money invested at a 7% return, it balloons into a $138,000 cash surplus over 10 years. To break the cement, you have to apply the load-bearing wall test. Look at every recurring expense over $100 and ask, if I lost my job tomorrow, could I cut this immediately? If the answer is yes, but you haven't done it, that is the lifestyle cement talking, not logic. Prioritizing what your colleagues see in the parking lot over the numbers in your account systematically drains hundreds of thousands of dollars of compounding power from your future. Even if you save aggressively, you face an external threat that ignores your savings rate entirely. This is the sequence destroyer. The truth is, your retirement survival depends heavily on what the stock market decides to do in your first 3 years of leaving the workforce. We have seen this play out repeatedly. Market collapses routinely obliterate the portfolios of comfortable investors at the exact moment they are ready to exit the workforce. This chart breaks down the mechanics. Line A is a portfolio enjoying a steady 7% average return. But look at line B. If you retire with $500,000 and the market drops 25% in year 1, your base shrinks. If you keep withdrawing living expenses from that depleted account, you permanently cripple your capital base. Line B hits zero 11 years early. People rely heavily on the idea of an average return over time, but the average means absolutely nothing if the sequence of those returns is negative at the starting line. You are forced to sell assets at depressed prices just to eat, leaving you with fewer shares to benefit from the eventual recovery. Escaping the sequence destroyer requires understanding that a successful retirement is less about the total size of your portfolio and entirely about engineering a defense against the unpredictable timing of Wall Street. There is one final hidden vulnerability that bankrupts retirement models from the inside out. Retirement often functions as a psychological collapse rather than the financial freedom people expect. Research shows that suddenly losing your professional structure increases the probability of clinical depression by 40% and the probability of diagnosed physical illness by 60%. When the brain loses its core purpose, it stops building and starts dismantling. These sudden medical crises act like a Trojan horse. A meticulously crafted financial plan that assumes reasonable health costs gets quickly destroyed by the cascading medical bills of a person who has lost their sense of identity. This mirrors corporate engineering failures. Top investors avoid buying companies built entirely around the identity of a single founder, because when that founder leaves, the entire organization collapses. The exact same physics apply to human life. A financial plan completely lacks structural integrity and is guaranteed to fail if it is not paired with a proactive purpose plan. We have identified the vulnerabilities. Now we need to implement the precise engineering fix required to reinforce your financial hull. This is the essential 3-stage reset you need. Stage 1 is to see the real number. You have to strip away the emotion and the false sense of safety. Calculate the exact mathematical gap between your projected 7% yield and your current monthly burn rate. Look at the gap and let the discomfort drive your urgency. Stage 2 is to close that gap aggressively by building a 2-year cash moat. This diagram shows how it works. You keep 2 full years of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds, completely separate from your core investments. This neutralizes the sequence destroyer, because when the market drops, you live off the moat and never sell stocks at a loss. Once the moat is built, every raise, bonus, and dollar freed from the lifestyle cement flows directly into your protected investment core. You bypass lifestyle inflation entirely. Stage 3 is building the structure. You must draft a purpose blueprint before you leave your job. Identify rigid, non-leisure projects, a consultancy, a mentorship program, anything with a strict timeline and other people involved, to give your brain traction before the pay stops. Executing these 3 stages detaches you from the doomed economic herd. It shifts your foundation away from hope and anchors your future in unbreakable math. The false safety illusion will attempt to return within 48 hours of watching this. Your brain will try to convince you to delay action until things settle down. Things will never settle down. Your 50s are the absolute final opportunity to pull the landing gear up. Waiting for the right feeling guarantees a crash. The people who retire with dignity are not necessarily the ones who started with the most money. They are the ones who refuse to operate on feelings and instead aligned themselves entirely with the numbers. If you want to understand the hidden mechanics behind money and protect yourself in the global economy, click the like button and subscribe to the channel.